Good morning, everyone, as you are joining. And welcome. It's great to see those faces with us. We invite you to participate and share any thoughts that you have, or quickly or briefly, just a system that you believe you could influence change as we get started. Our last session focused on how we see ourselves and models for change. So please do share. Welcome as you join. We have a lot of people rolling in. Good morning. As you join, feel free to share in the chat systems that you believe that you can influence change, either within your work organization, locally, nationally, wherever you feel compelled to share. And with that, I think we will get started. My name is Shannon Lemon. I'm the Vice President of Economic Development for the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce, and this gathering is the Equity Series. We have been running these series for 2 years now, and the work is really based and created by you, those of you who are joining in, and each of you are very important to the work, and the work is about our collective journey for personal change so that we can drive equity change in our organizations. And so this is a time of deep reflection and thinking, and an opportunity for us to figure out how we see ourselves, why we see ourselves that way, and what are the models for seeing ourselves so that we can be aware in order to make change happen. We always try to provide context and experiences, but we also are focused on real theory and practice in terms of how you can walk away with action. So I hope everybody has their morning cup of coffee and are prepared for a great session, because we have some amazing presenters today. In addition to your collective input and power to this work, with what we're doing today is not possible without our sponsors. So we want to acknowledge our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Bremer Bank. Our venue sponsor is Science Museum, and even though we can't be there in person, we're there in spirit. Our program sponsor is Bush Foundation, powering equity, diversity, and inclusion throughout the region. And our corporate sponsors, we have a brand new sponsor, Allianz Life, and we're so grateful for their participation and involvement and commitment to this work. So we welcome Allianz. Anderson Corporation, Anchor Paper Company, Flint Hills Resources, Land of Lakes, Mille Lacs Corporate Ventures, Redpath and Company, Travelers, and Excel Energy. Our contributing sponsors are Sunrise Banks and the University of St. Thomas. Another critical sponsor and partner in this work is Sankofa Leadership Network with Anika Ward, who is a partner and co-collaborator in what we're doing. And that is a perfect segue to Anika, who will guide us through this morning's sessions. You're in capable hands. And again, welcome to everyone who has joined us.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to SPAC and Shannon and Mikhail for the invitation to create and support and facilitate this dialogue with you all today and throughout the year. A reminder, we're here to talk about our role and responsibility as leaders in business and in community for creating and nurturing a more equitable and inclusive region. And so today is our third monthly equity series discussion. We've also had a series of bi-weekly equity briefs. And so several of you have been with us for quite a while, engaging in deep discussion around these issues. Throughout the dialogue, we began in March. Throughout this dialogue, there's been so much happening in the world that brings a spotlight to the importance of the discussions that we're having in this space and of the networking and questions that we're asking each other in the space. And so I'm grateful for the work that we're all doing. I've also heard from many of you outside of this space with dialogues about the work that you're doing in your company and questions and ideas that you're already asking and putting to work. And so I'm excited to hear that and to see that. That's exactly what the space is for. We have seen over the past several months the worldwide pandemic create these new discussions that haven't been everywhere. They've been in pockets up until recently about inequitable impacts of the systems that we've structured our world around. And so we're seeing the inequities in health come to the spotlight. They've always been there. We're seeing inequities in community. The killing of George Floyd at the hands of police showed us and illustrated for us much of what many communities have been describing and addressing and working on for a long time, and opened a broader conversation about the inequities that are structured into our systems. And so as much as these things that have happened have been difficult and horrifying for our communities, they've also given us an opportunity to engage in productive, thoughtful dialogue. As Minnesotans, we now have the attention of the world. Our structural inequities have the attention of the world and have the attention of the country. It's been an interesting dialogue within that space because we want to do better. We know we can do better. And suddenly resources and attention is coming to the forefront to help us do that. So we want to talk today about, today we have a discussion about leading with the multicultural lens. And we are so grateful for the speakers that we have here with us. I want to remind us that throughout our discussions, we've talked about what we need to be aware of. It is one thing to be aware of the inequities in our system. It's another thing to remember that the inequities, the outcomes that we're experiencing were designed with intention. And we've heard from speakers who have described that design. And so we know that we must intentionally bake equity into our laws, our policies, our practices, in all the systems that we all work in. And so today's discussion is very, very important. How do I lead? How do I know that I'm leading with a multicultural lens? So we have a treat. We have several treats today. We are going to first start with a discussion about from race to culture. And this is for me, this feels like a grounding activity and discussion that we'll ground ourselves in as we move into the next phase of the conversation. Elder Atum Zaire is the executive director, and Minkara Tizet is griot of psychology and psychiatry at the Cultural Wellness Center. And at the Cultural Wellness Center, they work to unleash the power of citizens to heal themselves while building community. They partner with organizations, institutions, and people to build community-centered models to solve problems and create lasting solutions. So with that, I will turn it over to Elder Atum and Minkara. Thank you both for being here with us today.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Minkara Tizet with the Cultural Wellness Center, and I really will begin by saying that at the Cultural Wellness Center, we really believe that at the core of well-being are relationships, kinship circles, self-knowledge, and the capacity to produce knowledge that are informed by ways of cultural knowledge systems. We arrive here at this place today realizing that our communities have to demonstrate the spiritual and economic, intellectual leadership that will move this society and indeed our civilization from a place of racial brutalization and objectivity to a place of culture, a place that has the capacity to hold the ravaged human heart that we face when we look into the eyes of our neighbors, our friends, our brothers and our sisters. We stand at a place where we have to begin to study our own hearts and the conditions that they are currently existing in. And as we ask ourselves this difficult question, are the conditions that we see in ourselves and that we face in our neighbors, friends, brothers, and sisters the same conditions that we want the next generation to know? What we face right now is this idea of white supremacy. And from our ground, white supremacy is a disease that is created by modern thought and that has been produced by a mode of thinking that has placed firmly its knee on the neck of the planet. So as we begin to look at the symbolique of Officer Derek Chauvin and his knee placed and pressed to the back of the neck of Brother George Floyd for a total of 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we have to ask ourselves, what produced this deep deprivation of hopelessness that this image invokes in our hearts and in our minds? And as we wrestle with this image, the question that we all have to ask ourselves is, what is our purpose in the solution? And so we finish by saying a few words from a poem that I've written called What Is This Pain? This pain belongs to me, the part of me that is multidimensional, because I understand me as we, our collective being. This pain is my mother's. It was my mother's pain. It is the pain of my uncles, men who died without an understanding of the pain they lived in. This pain of mine is painful. It is the ache in our tooth. It is pain. It is this pain. This pain was my mother's pain, slowly melting into her becoming. The pain of watching her heal through her ability to accept what was ahead of her. The pain, and this pain, is futuristic. It is in the present moment. We feel this pain. This is the pain that is set before us and that we are all called to resolve. Hotep, and thank you for having us.
Good morning. I am Atuma Zahir, and really grateful to have been invited to be with you today. There are a couple of slides that I'd like to pull up. And so the first thing we want to do is to really introduce the topic of moving from race to culture. Because moving from race to culture is not something that the community of people that we work with and live with and learn from are used to hearing. It's not a topic that people are used to hearing, this idea of moving from race to culture. For us, moving from race to culture gives us a chance to heal the kind of racialized wounds that we have all experienced. The idea today that we want to start with and leave you with is that as people of African heritage, as Black people, we have studied ourselves and have been studied. We have listened to ourselves, and we have talked about ourselves, about our pain. We've talked about those experiences, and in as many ways as can be used to express that, in song, in dance, in literature, in research, all of those modes of thought, all of those expressions of knowledge have been used to describe how we as Black people feel, how we struggle, how we suffer under the umbrella of what is referred to as white supremacy. We want to ask today you to think about whiteness. We want to ask today to have you think about what has whiteness done to you. We want to ask you in the short period of time that we have to consider that it is not a privilege, that the whiteness that has moved in the life and death of Brother George Floyd, and we propose to you also in the life and death of Derek Chauvin. We invite you to think about what has whiteness done to you. We ask you to think about the study of whiteness from your own experiential point of view. There are questions that we want you to take with you as you go into the small group session in a few minutes. We'd like you to ask those questions of yourself. We're inviting you to ask what whiteness has done to you. We're asking you to consider that if you are not white, what whiteness has done to you. If you are white, what has whiteness done to you? We want this to be your way of thinking from what point in your early years, birth to a certain age, when did you know you were white? Or when did you know you were not white? But the context for this is about whiteness, what it has done, when it happened, and the process that we now have to go through to actually eliminate the perception, what we refer to as the amnesia that whiteness has brought. I am hopeful that we can bring up the slides so that we can show the questions. We're thinking that if you can go into small group for about 10 minutes, we would like you to ask yourself, as we said earlier, the questions of what has whiteness done to you. And I don't know how many people per small group we will have, but we would like you to make the expression in your group and not ask the person who is making the expression to explain themselves. We just simply accept the statement, and as the statement is made, take the time for another person to make the statement. And as we say, do not kind of go back and forth, but just express for yourself what the questions are. We only have 10 minutes, and so you won't be able to get through everyone with every question. But please at least consider the first two. At what age did you first know you were white? What does whiteness mean to you? And then what did being white do, not for you, but to you? Not for you, but to you. And I would like you to come back and then share. A few people will be able to share with us. First of all, what you heard. So you're listening, hopefully, to white people talk about what whiteness has done to them. And for those of us who are not white in this session, consider the question, but ask the white members of our group to really express this idea of whiteness, not as a privilege, but whiteness as a kind of form of cultural amnesia and forgetting the history of humanity. So we will break into groups at this point.
A new perspective. Yeah, so.
Hello, I think we all just got popped back into the session, and I believe that Brother Menkara and Elder Atum will take back over now. Thank you all for that discussion. For me, it was engaging and interesting because I've had so many conversations with folks about the concept of Blackness and not as much about the concept of whiteness. So thank you for that time. Elder Atum?
Yes, I want to say that the struggle that we have, all of us have today, is that these are not questions that have a time limit of 2 or 3 seconds for you to answer. We acknowledge that, and we suggest to you that it is a question, this what is whiteness done to each of us, that we will now, at the point that we're in with COVID-19 and with once again the mourning that we're doing at the loss of both Brother George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, that you cannot have each of them stand in front of you and look at one and not the other. Derek Chauvin is a white man. How did that whiteness reduce his capacity for human empathy? And is that a widespread condition that you walk around with unknowingly? Is there a time now for us to get together? We have made a commitment at the Cultural Wellness Center that we will work with white people. We came into existence to work with Black people. We will continue to transform and be in a Blackness that gives us inspiration and hope and gives us culture and identity and humanity. We won't ask for humanity. We're creating humanity. But in that, we now have to work with white people to recognize and reconnect with their own humanity. And as we declare that, we also see ourselves then mourning with you, Derek Chauvin. There is a mourning, a coming to a place where you begin to see this is a human being whose life also basically has ended with this event. So we know that as the Cultural Wellness Center is both an approach and a course of study, we invite you to study this as you move through in your learning experiences. Self-study, self-knowledge, cultural self-study. You do have culture. You do have culture. And so what we'd like to continue to invite you to do is to study that culture. Cultural amnesia is forgetting your own history. And we're suggesting that that is devastation. It's been stripped from you as it has been from people of African heritage, Black people. Your stripping, you'll begin to document that as you look at what your ancestors had to do to change their names, to change their ways, to hide their rituals in order to fit into this whole idea of whiteness. And with that, separate and disconnect themselves in a way from all of nature, but the rest of humanity. I think that we just have a couple of seconds for one or two comments, please, from those who went into the small group. If you can unmute and just say a couple of what's come up for you, even a question.
This is Karen McCabe. I want to thank you for framing that question in such a manner that I've never encountered. I very much appreciate the opportunity to think about what whiteness has done for me. And I am white. I'm sorry I don't have my photo up or picture up. One of the things that I think it's done to me over several decades is insulated me or created this cocoon of ignorance. I fully believed the history books and all the lessons in my classes that didn't speak to some of the atrocities that American history has brought upon many different cultures. And so I very much appreciate the opportunity to give that some thought, and I think it'll cause me to think more moving forward. As you mentioned, 2 or 3 minutes isn't quite nearly enough to consider that. So thank you very much for allowing me that opportunity.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I just want to say thank you for bringing up the idea that we need to look at all of humanity. You know, I believe we are all interconnected, and so to point out that, you know, this concept, and I guess you didn't say it explicitly, but it's what I heard, is we are George Floyd and we are Derek Chauvin. And so for us to fall into this binary dialogue of this or that, and instead say this and that, and to look at how we can come together to create a new reality, a new healing, I think is just such a beautiful concept. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. One of the things I heard with many of the people we work with, European American students and teachers at the Cultural Wellness Center, is the idea that whiteness is an addiction. A very serious scholar that works with us from the U has written, and you can see that on our website, has written about whiteness and what it has done to him as a scientist, and how he now becomes an elder as a teacher and scholar of, once again, this idea of human transformation and becoming, based in how he has learned that from those of us who have had to be resilient and transformative in our efforts. My last comment to you is that as I grew up and saw my father, by the way, I'm 76, and so in 1943 and up to about 7, we were in Mississippi in the Delta, and I saw this white man spit in my father's face, and I saw my father stand tall, transform the moment, and become the hero that I have never forgotten to this day. What's powerful about it is he looked almost exactly like George Floyd. The same image, the same personality type. And so here we are today now, mourning again this kind of loss of image that my father carried. My father instructed me to say, what happened to Bill Morris who spat on him? What caused him to do that? And so this teaching comes from that experience of having to study both men, my father from a place of love and a place of admiration, adoration, and Bill Morris from a place of fear and what could have become hate but didn't because of my father. So this back and forth and resiliency and love and knowledge based in a original idea of humanity is what we offer you today as you go forward. I recommend also The Art of Intergroup Peace by George Halverson, if you can find it, because it gives you a chance to think through what culture will do for you as you have been invited to give up culture. We are now inviting you to go back to culture, examine it, drop those things that are detrimental to you and to others, and to begin to think about culture as a resource for health and healing. And a culture is a place to replace race, racialization, including whiteness and white supremacy. So, Miss Anika, I turn it back to you.
I want to thank you for being with us today, and thank you and Minkara and your team for the work that you all do. I think it's a fascinating, important conversation to think about the ways that accepting or letting go of our culture to accept a thing, whether that's called whiteness, blackness, brownness, what we're letting go of when we lean into accepting that identity over a cultural identity. And I think that's really important. Some of the things that I heard from what you said, and I think it was really important, the comment that was made just before you came back on about the fact that we are all George Floyd and we all are Derek Chauvin, which you were, the point that Elder Atum you were starting to make. Because we all, not only should we all identify with what happened to George Floyd, we should all identify with and start to think about how we are Derek Chauvin and even some of the other officers who stood there and didn't do something about it. And we need to go back to thinking about unpacking and thinking about how the values within our culture, there are values. We all have culture that we bring to the table, and there are values that we need to go back to. And thank you for reminding us of that. I really appreciate, this question of when did you know? When did you recognize? When did you realize that you were white? Or when did you realize that you are not white? Because this concept of whiteness is not something that we speak about a lot. I think sometimes in communities of color, we speak about it a lot because we speak about so I'm a Black woman, so I speak about in spaces that I'm in, Blackness and what Blackness in white spaces looks and feels like. So it's a conversation about what whiteness looks like for me, but don't often have the opportunity to have as many conversations outside of my community about whiteness. And so as much as I do about Blackness, because that's who I am. So thank you for that opportunity to reflect and think about that. I also, I would love to explore more this concept of our culture connecting us back to our humanity. So I know, we heard from a couple of people who said this concept of leaning into or believing in whiteness caused me to feel insulated. I heard someone in the group that I was in say, it caused me to feel, to be able to be ignorant to some of the things that other people were experiencing. For me, when I first learned that I was Black, when I first learned I was not white, was in an experience with my elementary school. I was describing in my group that I left public school that was almost all Black, and teachers encouraged my parents to sign me up for this private school that was almost completely white. And so almost immediately I think I knew I was not white by that time, but when I entered the school, the environment around me became hypersensitive to the fact that I was different, and began, young people point things out, young people say things, young people say, gosh, that's weird. Your hair does this thing, that's weird. And you are not normal Black like the people I see on TV. And so you get inundated with this concept of that there's an expectation of Blackness, there's a circle of whiteness, and you don't fit in it. So for me, that's been something I've had the opportunity to reflect on. But I want to thank you all for the great work that you do and for setting up this conversation that we're moving into next. We are going to have a discussion about mindset. And so you've set that up very, very beautifully for us, I believe. So I will introduce Dr. Ramon Pastrano. Dr. Pastrano is an architect, an architect of systems change and human transformation. He founded Impact Lives in 2007 as a Center for Cultural Competence and as a laboratory social responsibility and innovation. Through awareness-based leadership and critical thinking, his model is designed to assist individuals and organizations in developing new frameworks from where to solve their most challenging problems. By critically reflecting on the social, cultural, and geopolitical structures as a whole, his model helps to provide a better understanding of complex systems. His approach to problem solving is multidisciplinary and integrates science, medicine, business, faith, anthropology, and profound social change methodologies. Ramon is fluent in human-centered design, design thinking, transformational leadership, systems thinking, service learning, social responsibility, social innovation, and entrepreneurial leadership. Additionally, his innovative approach to intercultural competence and diversity, equity, and inclusion have been lauded by many organizations. We are excited and are grateful to have him here to discuss multicultural lenses. Dr. Pastrano, thank you so much for being here. We welcome you to this conversation.
Thank you, Anika. I really appreciate it. All of that is just to say that I love people, I love studying people, I love system, and I love studying how systems behave. So Mother Atun, thank you so much for such a powerful experience. One of the things that I usually find rather interesting as I work with people around the Twin Cities and outside that, Minnesota, is when you ask the question, can you describe your culture? It's pretty similar to, can you describe whiteness? And a lot of people don't even know that they have a culture. So asking the question sometime, what is whiteness and what whiteness have done to you is almost, for people like, what do you mean? It's almost asking them, do you see oxygen? You're breathing it every day, but very seldom you take the time to really go back and reflect on what that means to you and what it means to other people. So what I want to do in the next 15 minutes is just try to break this down for you. Where does all these mindsets form and how they shape the way that we interact with each other? So the first things that we need to know is that a person's mindset is not only what they used to think, with or process information with, but they also is something that they're using to interpret all the interaction during the day and also how they experience adversity. So understanding our mindsets, our mental models, our schemas, our frame of reference is the starting point to really understanding more about ourselves and how our lenses, sometimes shape and delimit the way that we interact with other people. The first things that you need to know is this: we do not see things as they are. We see them as we are. In other words, our lenses, our prescription, the one that we're using, they're not fully corrected. So we see better when we see through the eyes of the others as well. And in that process, by looking through the eyes of the other, we don't lose our own perspective. We gain a much larger perspective. Our conceptual space of thinking is expanded. So we do not think things as they are, but we also something remarkable happened, in each and every one of us based on our life experience. And that is that we create what we expect and we see what we expect to see. So that's also part of that process. If you take that into account, you begin to understand that we are highly influenced from the experience of our lives. And then the way that we interact with each other is either by reacting or reflecting. But the primary mode right now is reactive, which really gets us in trouble. So when I look at how are my lens affecting my viewpoint, I need to take into consideration my life experience, my selective perception. I said always that every act of perception is an act of selection, and every act of selection is an act of inclusion or exclusion. Your brain is doing that on a regular basis. It is doing it right now as we, go into this conversation. We also need to understand that we have blind spot. We have blind spot because we are ethnocentric by nature. We're using our own life experience to judge and evaluate whatever is in front of us. And then we start, also understanding that certain habits of mind also shape the way that we interact with other people. So we have left or right brain is also going to determine how you communicate, how do you engage other people. Historical awareness. This is one of the biggest disservice that has been done to white people and also to Black people. To white people because have led them to become ignorant of their own culture. Historical awareness have caused right now such a huge disorienting dilemma among white people and people from the dominant culture, because now when they see everything that is happening, they don't have the right elements to process what they're seeing. And as such, they are almost in a traumatic environment right now because they cannot process what they're seeing. Why is this happening? Why are these things, why are people so upset, with these racial injustices? Were they there before? So they're trying to reconcile all these things and they don't have the historical awareness to do that. So therefore, now we find ourselves exposed, but not having the tool to really process what we're seeing. And then we need to talk our biases. Biases are preferences that we have, implicit associations that we make. And those things affect also the way that we interact with each other. Being biased is not bad. It makes us human. However, they are bad when we are using it to create advantages and disadvantages for certain groups. And the most important thing, again, is we need to be able to see through the eyes of other people. So here is how these mental models and mental processes that form the lens through which we understand the world begin. Your family is the primary designer of your lenses. Your family, and I hear this a lot, especially older, folks that I work with, they start telling story on how their parents were prejudiced. They were, behaving certain negative way toward people that were different than they were. So they start learning this at an early age. Your education. Education is important. Where you were educated, and again, historical awareness or lack of historical awareness is going to have an impact on you. Your religion is also part of that as well. And right now, your social life, but more important, social media. Social media has become such an impactful venue, that is creating. It has helped us, connect, but at the same time, it's also have polarized, our culture. So the more we interact, the more we repeat some of these experiences, the more we think and behave and interact in a certain way, the stronger those neurological connections become, the more those neurological pathways, the deeper those neurological pathways get, and those become the habits of mind that we create for each other. So when you look at the diversity wheel here, the things that are at the center, your personality, the internal dimensions, that's what we call the core zone. The core zone are the things that are most important to you. Those are the things where your values, the things that you believe are critically important. When you look at external dimension, you begin now to see that there's a buffer between the organizational dimension and the external dimension. When you look at the external dimension and the organizational dimension, that's what we call the fluid zone. The difference between the fluid and the core zone is that people, things in the fluid zone are easy to exchange. You know, when you're trying to help somebody understand a different concept that they don't understand, the things that are in the fluid zone are the things that people are willing to, all right, to concede. Now, the things that are in the core zone are the things that are harder to change. But we have a huge problem right now. When we look at political ideologies right now, let's take, for instance, political ideologies. Political ideologies is supposed to be in the organizational dimension. But now, through social media, through news media, through the kind of interactions that we're having, political ideologies now are moving toward the center, toward the core zone. And what happened is that when people internalize a particular ideology, that ideology becomes part of their identity. And when they become part of their identity, what happened then? If you do not agree with them, or if you disagree, what happened? They take it as a personal attack. So this is impacting the way that we are either not dialoguing with each other or the way that we interact with each other. So which is not dialogue, it's more debate, and it's more, in polarizing way. So right now it's very difficult to disagree with somebody without the person taking it, personal. You can test this if you go into Facebook, into Instagram, you see, all that battle going on. It's all because they have allowed something from the outside to become part of their core zone. However, because it was not originally a part of it, with good work, with good conversation, with good understanding, those things can be kicked out that particular area. So as such, all communication, everything that we do is filtered through our worldview, our mental models, our schemas, our mindsets, everything. It doesn't matter. Everything that you experience in life, if you're breathing and you're interacting with people, you are experiencing through those lenses. And then we get into this concept of worldview. Okay, so worldview is not what you think about, is what you use to process what is in front of you. Worldview play a very important role. Worldview provide for us psychological and emotional stability. When you believe something all your life, you build a foundation that you're using to understand everything else. If that foundation, you find out, later on, that is not accurate, that is not true, like is happening right now to a lot of people that finally are waking up to the fact that, oh my goodness, we do have a racist system that is leaving a lot of people of color outside. Now they get into this disorienting dilemma because their worldview was incomplete. There was something missing. And they built a whole history of understanding in a faulty worldview. So psychological and emotional the dimension is going to be affected if the worldview is not accurately represented. And in this case, we don't have African-American historical awareness. We don't have Native American historical awareness. And as such, then people are now struggling with what they're seeing and not being able to make sense. So they need to reconstruct their worldview. They need to be expanded. And the way to do that is to enter into the experience of the other, being able to see through the eyes of other, and being able to process at a deeper level. The way that Anika was referring to at the beginning, we need to not only process the information, we need to access the information, and then we need to integrate that information so deeply as to create transformation in each and every one of us. So by the time that you are an adult, you are driven by a set of experience, concept, values, feelings that condition the way that you interact with others, and that they selectively shape and delimit your expectations, your cognition, and pretty much your line of actions is set. And by the time that you are 35 years old, your unconscious brain is in full control of you. Your unconscious brain is the one making decisions, is the one categorizing, is the one making all the mental processes that you're using when you are making decisions. So let me give you an example on how these mental models form. So here are 12 mindsets that I believe are affecting the way that we do business, the way that we educate, and the way that we interact with each other. So when you look at equality and equity, and I'm going to focus on those two, and individualistic versus collectivistic mindset. When you look at equality and equity, you're still hearing people not having shared meaning in any of those two mindsets. You hear a lot of people talking about equality, when the reality, it should be equity. So here's what happened. When you are looking at equality mindset, business leaders are assumed that everyone should be treated the same, one size fits all. These are people that, again, are primarily in what we call minimization. They don't see differences, or they create as commonalities based on their own assumptions. An equity mindset, here's what happened. Business leaders acknowledge and value differences of all kinds and consider historical facts, historical awareness, and opportunity as factors in employee performance. So one of those two, mental model or mindset, is going to lead you somewhere, and maybe somewhere where you do not want to go. But what drive these mental models or these mindsets? When you look at the monocultural mindset of equality, the driving orientation is that everyone has a chance. Everyone has a chance. And you hear this conversation sometimes very often where people are saying, well, I don't know what happened since 1960, we created, equality for everybody. Why are they complaining about? So that is what drives this mindset. Everybody has a chance. They believe that everybody is playing on the same level field. And the definition is that, people see societal system as basically fair or just for everyone. They don't see where all this little, how the systems have created itself in a way that leave people outside or perform better for other people. And the consequences is that, the performance, especially in your organization, is going to be, blame the victim approach, and bias is going to drive your behavior. But what happens when you adopt an equity mindset? The orientation is going to be that you are seeing more than the average person is seeing. You see structural injustice, you see system disconnect, you see system limitation, and you know that this structure of injustice will not allow people to move forward, will not allow people to succeed. And the definition here is that people with equity mindset see society as benefiting some and disadvantaging others. These are people that are looking with both eyes open. And as such, they will remove unconscious bias and stereotype, and performance is going to be analyzed through the lens of the organization's DEI orientation and individual needs. In other way, people are going to be able to see the individual in his own wholeness. The last things that I will say here is collectivistic versus an individualistic mindset. A collectivistic and individualistic mindset is leading us in a very challenging direction right now. And the way that I see it is an individualistic mindset is what driving a lot of people to put the right before the responsibility. A collectivistic mindset will put, responsibility ahead of your personal right. So when I ask the question in large settings like this, can you name at least 5 or 10 of your basic human constitutional right? Everybody can do it in minutes. But when I ask, can you name at least 3 of your civic responsibility? Everybody has that blank stare in their face like, what are you talking about? I didn't even know that there was such a thing. Yes, I had to learn it when I became an American citizen. So when we continue to put our rights ahead of our civic responsibility, our rights will never be preserved. Why? Because the other people are also have the same right or the opposite right that you're claiming. So that is what happened when we have mindsets that we are not aware of and how they inform the way that we make decisions. I will stop right here. And Anika?
Dr. Ramon, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm going to be watching in the comments section. So people in the group, please feel free to chime in and share questions or thoughts with Dr. Ramon as we talk, but we're going to take a little bit of time just to process what you've shared. And then we will, I'll introduce our next speaker in a little bit. But I wanted to, oh, I just lost my notes. There we go. I wanted to check back in with you, Dr. Ramon. I appreciated the conversation that you shared, especially the concept that we are creating neurological pathways right now that lead to habits of mind that become very hard to get out of or to change as the stronger and stronger we make them. And so as we think about how we're creating neurological pathways, this concept of leaning towards having an equity mindset versus an equality mindset, I really appreciate. And also the concept of moving towards a collective mindset from an individual mindset so that we are prioritizing our responsibilities before our rights rather than vice versa. Can you share any practical tips from your experience for growing your multicultural mindset so that we can live into and create the neurological pathways to be equity centered and collective mindset focused?
Yeah, it begins with the understanding that the brain is not wired to perceive what it doesn't know. You don't know what you don't know. And, to be fair, there's a lot of people that don't even know, how this racial system and how this system has been in place, right? So it began by exercising your brain. It began by educating your brain. It began by becoming historical aware of what's going on. So when I hear people are talking about cancel, culture, a lot of terminologies that are being thrown out there that really make no sense. Somebody's trying to erase our history. Well, your history is incomplete. And people are not trying to erase your history. Actually, people are trying to remind you of the history that you're missing. So the best things that people can do is really feed your brain, expose yourself to knowledge that you don't have, because the brain is like a computer, right? If your database, that massive database that is between our ears is lacking information, you're not going to have that information to process what you're seeing. So learn, make sure that you're doing the learning not from Google, not from Facebook, not from some of the social media that are or news media that are geared to push their own ideology, but find resources that can really give you accurate information. When you have that information finds its way into your worldview and begin to make correction. So, and here is how that happens. So I'm talking about something that is, almost so implicit, but it's happening to us every day. We are picking up information. The more confidence we have on that information, the less confidence we begin to have in information that is not accurate. And then that information begin to replace the other, right? And once you begin to fill your brain with accurate information, accurate facts is really powerful. When you, one of the things that was really devastating for me to experience is being, having a reflection at the Lincoln Memorial and seeing the Gettysburg Address on one side and looking at the Lincoln's second inaugurational speech. The education there is so powerful. Then you go not too far away to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, and it's just another powerful experience. And then you walk into the Capitol, and the first movie that they show you, zero historical awareness about African American and Native American. And it's like you lose everything from one point to another. So for that reason, it is critical that each and every one of us take the time to really educate ourselves. Our brain need to be exercised. It need to be fed. It's like you know what? Let me put it this way, right? Every time the Apple, send you an update, you update your computer, right? That's what you need to be doing with your brain.
Thank you so much. And I've got some comments it looks like comments rather than questions that this discussion is really bringing up for people in the group. Someone said that this conversation, Frida Alvarez, this conversation reminds Frida of a study on how folks even when presented with facts and information that contradicts their worldview, it makes them stay with their worldview rather than believing the truth. And thank you for such a wonderful presentation. And then Rita Dibble says that, and reminds us so you can see there's a list in the chat of civic responsibilities that we need to learn and remind ourselves of, including supporting and defending the Constitution and staying informed of issues affecting your community. And then Jesse says yes to the equity mindset. When colleagues feel seen and heard, they're able to show up in their truest whole selves and are able to perform at their highest levels. So I think this conversation for me really reminds me of the work that we have to do as leaders, as individuals, whether we consider ourselves a leader or not. We show up in spaces in ways that impact others, that unconsciously, subconsciously impacts other people's worldview and understanding of the world, that impacts the way they show up in the world. So our responsibility for connecting and learning and rewiring our brain on a continual basis is important. You talked about the resources that we need to go and find in order to get connected to the historical facts, and you shared a little bit. Are there other resources that have been influential and important for you as you continue to wire your brain towards equity?
Yeah, just practically, I think the most important things is interaction with people. Diverse opinion, people of diverse thoughts. I always said that again, when you see with the eyes of other people, you're open to do that. That doesn't compromise your core values or what you believe, but expand the way that you think. There are tons of resources out there. The Science Museum has a great exhibit. The race exhibit is a very powerful tool. Many of the arts organizations in the Twin Cities have done a great job at curating things that can really help us process. But the most important thing actually is your critical reflection process. Is you can have an experience and yet still miss the meaning of that experience, because information is just information. It's when you internalize and ask yourself, what does this mean to me? And how does that, rub against my core values or the belief that I'm espousing at this moment that is, impacting what I'm seeing. So for the person that was talking about, people that don't change their worldview, well, that is what we call ideological boxes. When people get into an ideological boxes, you automatically become blind. You're looking for evidence of what you know to support what you believe. And then you tend to gravitate toward people that think like you. The whole idea is not to hit people, head on, but ask them the question that they're not asking themselves, because they're blind, they're not seeing it. So when you ask them questions that they're not seeing, that they're not asking themselves, and you make them think, now they begin to realize that there's something. The work needs to be done by them, not by you or not by me. But we can guide them, through that process of understanding. I have a rule now is I don't debate. I do dialogue. And I begin by saying that dialogue in the Greek word is meaning through the word, meaning through the word. If you want to have a dialogue, let's have a dialogue. But I don't need to debate you, because otherwise, I'm a maximizer and I'm an achiever and I want to beat you. And you don't want that. So dialogue is a great thing, because dialogue is for both, and dialogue is for both, to learn.
Thank you for that. That's I love that point, because I totally identify with that. If I get into a conversation from a space of debate, I'm incredibly competitive and I will go there, but the goal is to win. The goal is to win the debate. If I get into a conversation from a space of dialogue and that's a space where I'm leaning in to understand.
Yes.
I have more of an opportunity to gain some knowledge, or at least to gain some insights.
Absolutely. Let me add one more thing that has been very helpful to me, because you have a lot of folks right now that want to talk about the riots. They want to talk about Black Lives Matter. They want to talk about all the things that have been happening, protests, etc. And one of the rules that I have is, okay, before we can touch that, let's talk about the pre-existing conditions that cause that need to be on George Floyd's neck. When we understand that, your questions about Black Lives Matter, about the riots are going to be very different. So what I'm doing is giving them an opportunity to become more historically aware. And let's break that down. Exactly, that is what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was doing on Letter from Birmingham Jail. I think it's paragraph number 3 or 4. If you haven't had the opportunity to read that letter, go back right now. You can substitute Birmingham from Minneapolis, and it's like it's speaking to this time. So he's saying, you are so concerned with the riots and the protests that you're seeing, and yet you are not seeing the reasons that caused those riots. And that is one of the problems that we have in our culture. We are geared to focus on symptoms, not on the root cause of the problem. That's another faulty mental model that leads us, in the wrong direction. So by focusing on the root cause, people have the opportunity to learn at the deepest level the why. And that's a great opportunity for any one of us here to educate people. Before we can talk about the symptoms, let's talk, about that knee. That knee didn't happen in 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That knee began to happen about 500 years ago, not 400, about 500 years ago. So let's break that down.
What a powerful point to make, and really, connected to the last the conversation that you brought up about debate versus dialogue. So if you're hearing the conversation and seeing what's happening in the world, and you get caught up in the question of whether or not it's right to riot, and that's where you land. That's because you might be in the conversation from a debate perspective, because you found a point that you believe in, and you stuck to that instead of asking why and
Exactly.
why to gain something. So thank you so much for that, and the conversation about challenging our faulty mental models. I just want to note that Leah mentioned that what we're discussing makes her think about Howard Zinn's description of historians as cartographers. They're creating projections. And Philomena offers the Center for Inclusion, run by the YMCA, is also a great place for learning for a virtual reality experience. Cynthia shares a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson: "A mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original dimensions," which is really, really great. If we're open to the new ideas, we have new spaces our mind can go to. We also have a note from Allison Brown, who leads the Science Museum of Minnesota, that we are updating our exhibit, the race exhibit that Dr. Ramon described. Race, Are We So Different? And we'll relaunch it in January with 2 other exhibits in January: The Bias Inside Us and Skin. So thank you for that update, Allison. Leah says, pre-existing conditions makes me think of health and health insurance. Whiteness provides insurance and safety nets to these systemic pre-existing conditions and their symptoms. And non-whiteness is a denial of coverage. Thank you, Leah. I wanna thank you, Dr. Ramon, for your time with us this morning and all the insights that you've shared with us. I am so thrilled to learn from you and hear from you. And I know that you are going to be leaving for another meeting soon. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing this time with us. We appreciate it. And we look forward to the next time we get to hear from you.
Thank you. And I want to remind everybody that this is a journey, and this journey doesn't have a destination. So the focus is in the process, how we get there, because we're going to have to adjust every single time. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great rest of your morning.
Thank you, you too. So I am going to shift us within the same conversation about mindset matters. I am excited to welcome our next presenter, Dr. Jonathan Stewart. Dr. Jonathan Stewart specializes in writing and facilitating for business and educational purposes. For over 20 years, he taught in higher education, designing customized and experiential courses. He's worked in South Korea and South Africa, Guatemala, and in the Twin Cities. His clients include Medtronic, the City of Brooklyn Park, Habitat for Humanity, and the MSP International Airport. Dr. Stewart was a Fulbright Scholar in 2015 to 16 and offers both workplace mediation and meeting facilitation services. In his spare time, he volunteers with the Dispute Resolution Center and Pilgrim Center for Reconciliation, both in St. Paul. He holds a MA in Human Resource Development and Adult Education and a PhD in Organizational Leadership, both from the University of Minnesota. Dr. Jonathan, we are so happy to have you here with us to discuss minimization and alternative mindsets. Thank you for being here. Oh, there we go.
Good morning, everybody. Really nice to be with you, and I really appreciate the introduction. I'm going to practice something that Ramon has encouraged me in, and I don't often like to do it, but I'm going to start by trying to unpack part of my own journey. I don't usually like talking about myself, but I want to just give you a background and then show you some slides that actually he referred to in terms of minimization and how it is an unhelpful, oftentimes, mindset. So in my small group, Elder Atum asked us to think about where we come from and thinking about whiteness, and that's an uncomfortable conversation for me. That's not something that I easily want to talk about or see, but it is something that is more with me than I realize. It's a pair of glasses that I have, and I often forget, just like, you know, the nose on my face. I look right past it. I grew up in Blaine, Minnesota, and through a number of circumstances met my wife, who's actually Jamaican, in South Korea, of all places. We traveled together. I did graduate work. We lived with our family, 3 biracial kids, in Guatemala for a year. This is to say I've been struggling or learning or in this process of seeing my lenses and also having to wrestle with that background. But I can honestly say it hit me in a different way the year that Philando Castile was killed 2 blocks from my house. I was a volunteer firefighter with the city of Falcon Heights. We've lived here since 2002. I was stopped on Larpenteur Avenue multiple times, sometimes just driving at 3 a.m. to pick up my sister to take her to the airport. Just randomly, a police pulled out after me. And I can say I never realized the impact for myself as a white male compared to an African-American male. I can honestly say it never occurred to me the systems that were put in place, which were put in place, I came to realize that in the city of Falcon Heights, the policing structure was such that every little thing mattered. And the police were told that they needed to check into everything. It wasn't explicitly said that, you know, we're going to be biased or we're going to be prejudiced, but it was explicitly said that we're going to check into everything. And so both the systemic and the natural inclinations that we all have as individuals led to not just Mr. Castile losing his life, but it led to other situations in our city, which I had to own in a different way. I had to wrestle with that. We had to look at both the political structures in our city, which we're still doing. We had to do work as a community and figure out how I, on this block near a housing unit of people that are non-white, what does that mean? What does that mean in our schools? And then I had this opportunity 1 year ago to do a learning journey called Sankofa with mostly males, both European American and African American males, but also women as well, variety of people. We took a 3-day bus tour together across the South. We went to Atlanta, we went to Birmingham, we went to Montgomery, we went to Mississippi. I was in Medgar Evers' home where he was killed. We had to dialogue together and sit and talk about our experiences and where we came from. And I can tell you, I've been a mediator in difficult conversations at the Ramsey County Courthouse. But for me to be in those positions and to have to listen, first of all, to have to hear, I heard and I learned. Even for me, one of the impacts was just personally thinking about myself as white has some power associated with it. That was a term that was given to differentiate and to also include power. to be white or non-white. I had to think about myself. I remember jogging in Jackson, Mississippi. I got up early, and we were roomed with somebody from a different background than us. So I naturally woke up and I told my friend, who is a friend, African-American guy, Tommy, I said, hey, let's go on a jog this morning. He's like, I don't think I want to go on a jog around Jackson. Again, I'm thinking for myself, right? And as I'm jogging around Jackson, I'm trying to separate myself from the historical places where injustices happen. I'm trying to justify in my mind as I'm jogging what I'm seeing with who I am. And there was a very convicting opportunity for me to learn and to keep digging into the way that I have been set up as a male, as a European American male, coming from the background that I came from, inheriting what I inherited in a very, very different way. And as Ramon said, it's a journey. It's not an end destination. So I am definitely on the journey, but I'm constantly having to be reminded of this unhelpful lens that I was given, which can be thought of as minimization. And I know some of you maybe, have used this as a helpful thought for yourself as well. But this unhelpful lens, known as minimization, actually comes from a model that was developed by Milton Bennett. It's called the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity. And Dr. Ramon and myself and many others in the Twin Cities use this model when we work with folks using a specific inventory called the IDI. But it helps us identify this continuum of how we experience difference. And as Ramon used in his slide, monocultural mindset, a mindset that is very binary, as Alyssa used that word. It's either or, it's us and them. And there's denial of difference. There is a polarization of difference. There's a minimization of difference. And in the more intercultural mindsets, there's acceptance and adaptation. As I mentioned, this is a part of the IDI, which I know some of you have taken individually or your organizations have taken, but it's a helpful paradigm to think about. It brings kind of what's in the background up in front of us so that we can see and place ourselves, and not only see where we are, but see how we can grow, how we can develop lenses and then specific practices that are more inclusive. Now, we would say that there's a place, there's an opportunity for all of these different mindsets in different settings. There certainly is value depending on your situation in different ones, but it is more and more becoming unhelpful to have a monocultural mindset in an intercultural world. I use the word unhelpful. I don't use wrong or right, but unhelpful, because minimization as an unhelpful lens is, first of all, it's based on my perception versus my reality. I can say I've got a perception of myself, I've got a perception of who I am and how I show up, but the IDI also gives me an opportunity to say there's a gap maybe between how I see myself in terms of working across difference and where I actually am. This gets back to organizational psychology and Arjus and Schoen, who talk about my espoused theory versus my theory in use. And folks, what I tried to describe to you with my experiences living in Falcon Heights and even going to the South is I keep seeing this gap. I keep seeing that I'm further away from how I see myself compared to how I really am, and the glasses, the lenses, the ways that I actually orient. Now, minimization is often the most commonly held orientation. And it is unhelpful because it uses universal similarities at the expense of important differences. In an organizational setting, this is often why people of color might be hired, but then they are not, they don't stay with the organization. There's a minimization of the important differences that we have. And you know, there's psychological safety in just naturally wanting to find our commonality. I want to quickly build a bridge with somebody and I want to figure out, okay, we've got this in common. That's not wrong, but it's often unhelpful if I only stop there and I don't recognize there are really important differences here. There's differences in gender, there's differences in age, there's differences in our cultural background, there's differences in the skin that we have, the way we experience the world. You know, I was really encouraged to think about this in talking with Ramon, where he said minimization worked well until about 6 weeks ago. Until about 6 weeks ago, when not only was Mr. Floyd killed, but what came out of that, it has started to make minimization even less helpful. And if I want to get stuck in minimization, as he said, I'm not actually looking backwards. I hope you've appreciated just in this session how we've started with Elder Atum in thinking about ourselves, and then with Ramon and how he encouraged us to think about the historical background, because these things come into play, and these common assumptions that I have in minimization are often going to get me stuck. So I think I might stop there. I've got another slide or two that I possibly could share, but maybe I'll just stop and open it back up, turn it back over to you, Anika, to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jonathan. Both you and Ramon are really wonderful to hear from, and I appreciate having you here and the opportunity to get into a dialogue with you. The conversation about the IDI as a tool and an instrument for us to measure, something for us to use. I think there's no perfect measurement, but it is something. What I found is it's something that gives us a language to have conversations that are sometimes difficult to have, and to think about leaning towards this other way of thinking, another way of mindset. I also appreciate the conversation, the concept that the monocultural mindset is not necessarily wrong, because I think sometimes within IDI conversations we find ourselves there, and then there is often shame about the mindset you carry. I think it's really helpful to say that it's not necessarily wrong. It's just becoming more and more unhelpful in certain circumstances, and we want you to have this understanding, this way of engaging in this world available to you, so that when you're as a leader, especially when you're engaging in circumstances that require it, you have those tools. So I appreciate that. Can you talk about, from your experience, and I'll watch in the chat as well for folks who might have questions, so please chime in, group. But if you can share, Dr. Jonathan, from your experience, using the IDI as a tool for organizational growth and change. You talked about, so I guess it's a two-part question. How is the IDI as a tool effective in helping shift organizations and helping have conversations that lead to growth and change, ultimately with better outcomes, more equitable outcomes? And then the second part, you talked about, being really attentive to the gap between how you think you show up in the world and how you actually show up, and how the IDI can help, or just how this conversation can help you mind that gap.
Thanks. Yeah, good question. So I should say minimization can be helpful. As you said, it recognizes the essential humanity of every person. It tries to act in tolerant ways and avoid stereotypes. But again, it might be overlooking really important differences. The IDI tool in itself, as you said, is one tool. It's widely used to help organizations benchmark themselves, and then put an action plan together, both collectively, so it can give you kind of a collective, large-scale cultural, lens, and then it can also give you opportunities to how you can grow that. We've used that, for example, Ramon and I, over the course of about 3.5 years with PPL, Project for Pride in Living, where over a number of years, we measure together year 1, year 2, year 3, different cohorts, their leadership team, And then there are, interventions put in place in those years that would help individuals take opportunities to try to grow their own cultural competence. It would have something to do with hiring practices. It would have something to do with creating spaces for all employees to dialogue. And this whole idea of equity, I love, this idea of equity is all of us coming to the table. Everyone needs to have a place at the table. So there's opportunities there to both measure and then benchmark and then continue to grow. Your question about minding the gap, I think it is really just a human condition that we don't naturally mind the gap. Sometimes we need to, again, bring it into our awareness. And the whole idea of my espoused theory, I love coming back to that in my own life, as a husband, as a father. I have these ideals that I set for myself, but I have something that is actually different than that. And I think we can see that in our country. I think we have ideals, but we live far from those ideals. And that encourages me to think we've got somewhere to go, and it is a journey. And my well-being is not just my individual well-being, my individual rights. It's my well-being is dependent on everyone and everyone's well-being. And it gives me a different mindset.
Thank you for that. And I think, so when I've seen people use the IDI, there's also this opportunity, and I think Philomena described the IDI as a great instrument and reminded us that the power happens in the one-on-one coaching session after that leaders are supported by. Can you talk about what those sessions look like? And from my perspective, so I'd love to share with folks what those sessions look like and feel like for a leader and how they're supportive. But then I'd also love your insights on what's tough about that. When you go into an organization and you're trying to support them to move from this one point to the other, what are the challenges that you find within the organizations, and how do you support leaders to move through those challenges?
Thanks. First of all, I think shame is a really horrible teacher. I think how you approach that conversation is so important, because you want to invite people to explore and be curious rather than feel on the defensive. Coaching, I think, is probably the most powerful individual tool, because when done well, when done right, it gives you an opportunity to start to speak about your own lived experience and have someone kind of just listen to you and find ways, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that has something to do with that. Ask you questions that help make you curious. So for example, with PPL, we would do 2 large-scale workshops, and then each person would have the opportunity to do 2 follow-up coaching sessions. One where they would kind of develop their action plan, their individual performance plan, specific things that they would want to do to kind of grow their own cultural understanding of themselves and others. And that could be through, a variety of things, participating in things, being part of different groups, finding different media to listen to, or books. I love getting books, and I'm going to be checking out The Art of Intergroup Peace here. But there's a lot of different things you can do. And then to come back for a second coaching session and say, okay, what did you learn? How did you process that? Ramon used the idea of transformational theory, Jack Mesereau, and this idea that reflection, once I have a chance to reflect, I might have a disorienting dilemma, such as when Philando Castile was killed, or when I was jogging in Mississippi, Jackson. But how can I then reflect on it? How can I then dialogue about it with someone else to help me actually start to move, to start to change? I can experience a lot of difference. I can experience a lot of things, but if I'm not engaged in it, dialoguing, reflecting, chances are my learning won't happen. So some of that coaching is drawing that out and giving people accountability to have to reflect and process. And I think it's a great opportunity for leaders. I think leaders, I always say, managers, leaders, your tool belt is not one size fits all. And this helps you add to your ways of reaching people. We want to reach people, and we have to do that differently, especially as leaders.
James Lockwood asks, I bristled at the word minimization as I was always taught to try to walk in someone else's shoes to understand their being and have empathy. How do we walk in other shoes to be able to converse without appearing that we are minimizing someone else's experience?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think, again, I think in minimization, you are coming to some recognition, actually in the model, the DMIS model. It's almost a transitional phase between the monocultural and the more multicultural. It's this starting to see, I do come from a cultural place myself, and I need to recognize that in someone else instead of just projecting. What oftentimes happens is those of us, majority culture, we project, and we are able to sort of just expect that everyone would have those same values, that same experience. So I think it's an opportunity to listen. I think part of that comes from listening. I think part of that comes from having to sit and hear things that make me uncomfortable. I'm always reminded, I have to sit, I have to hear it, I have to bear witness to it, and I need to check myself that I don't, in that way, minimize that experience. I can give you an example. My spouse comes home from work and she had an experience that was really demeaning to her as a woman. Now, my first reaction, I want to make her feel better, right? I want to say, oh, I'm sure that didn't matter, honey. But the feedback I got was, don't try to just debate that away. Trust my experience. It's a term I love called counterintuitive solidarity. And it means I'm going to trust your experience. I'm not going to try to see it through my lens. I'm going to just listen to your experience. I'm going to allow your experience to impact me. I'm going to give you the opportunity to speak for yourself and just let that be true, instead of trying to either pacify you or just say, oh, I'm sure that wasn't intentional or something like that.
That's fascinating. Another opportunity to learn, I think, and grow from people who you disagree strongly with is this counterintuitive solidarity. I appreciate that. One other question I've got from Colleen Sheehy. Our small nonprofit doesn't have funds to pay significant costs for IDI. I haven't been able to identify foundations that offer support for this kind of work. So any ideas on resources for organizations like Colleen's?
Yeah, good question. Somebody might be able to put in the chat. I believe that there are organizations out there. I know some organizations have partnered with Wilder, the Wilder Foundation. Some organizations have partnered with the YMCA. There's other nonprofits sometimes that you can partner with. I know cost can be prohibitive, but depending on what you want to do, I think there's opportunities to find it. And there are I believe there are nonprofit costs or educational costs for the IDI compared to, for-profit or larger companies.
I'd also suggest, so get yourself or your organizational leader an equity coach, a coach that can help them from a systems change perspective, process the types of changes that are needed and the types of conversations. Because I think from my perspective, what the IDI and other tools, and other tools do is provides you a framework to kind of take the conversation off of what specifically is happening wrong in the organization, and starting with, because we have to get there, but starting with a conversation about where we are right now and where we need to grow to as an organization, and then gives you a framework to have that discussion. So I think also if you've got coaches and different organizations that work with people to do that, I do provide coaching, executive coaching that is focused on systems change, but there's lots of other people. I see Coney says Deep Sea does a pro bono client each year. Their application process is in late fall, early winter. So if there is very little resource to no resource, there's probably other opportunities like that. But there are a wealth of organizations and leaders in the Twin Cities that provide partnership to leaders within your organization. And so if you are looking for organizations like that, I'm sure Jonathan, Ramon, myself, and plenty others, Philomena and others in this group have access and can point you to a lot of opportunities, a lot of different folks that provide those services that might have other options for you. So please just keep in touch with the folks that are on this phone call. Dr. Jonathan and Dr. Ramon are huge resources. Dr. Jonathan, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. I can't tell you how much we appreciate you bringing this discussion here today. Do you have anything else you want to share as we close out?
You know, I will share one other thing. I'll just pull up a slide that was really helpful to me in higher ed. I know a lot of you have heard of the term growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I just saw this recently, and I just thought it was helpful. This is not my slide. This is not original to me. But this growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, you know, a fixed mindset says, I've got a certain amount of ability. I've got a certain amount of something here, but it's fixed. And, you know, this is when we're thinking about moving, not just to be aware, but to be anti-racist. And I think these quotes resonate with me in different ways. You know, I wonder what I can do. I wonder, I'm afraid I'm going to get something wrong. I'm afraid I'm going to get called out. And so it basically is a fear-based mindset where I don't want to stretch myself, where I don't know where to begin. And so that just stops me. Whereas a growth, you know, mindset is more like thinking about my ability as a balloon. The more I blow into the balloon, the bigger it gets. It's not fixed as a certain amount, but it's an opportunity to grow. And just to encourage us that we can grow. This is something that is not fixed. We are growing, and growth hurts, and growth is difficult, and change is hard. Mistakes will come. And I just, these other statements here on this growth side, it starts to give me courage, and I hope it gives you courage to be in the fire together.
It absolutely does. And you made a statement a little bit earlier that shame is a horrible teacher. And I really wish we had time to even dig into that a little bit more, but I think that's profound. And I think it connects to this conversation about fixed versus growth mindset. I saw a presentation by Bremer Brown, and I can't think of the opposite of shame. It was shame as kind of the space where we can't learn in and we can't grow in because we are ashamed of who we are. And then whatever I can't think of what the opposite of shame was from her perspective. Guilt. Thank you. Somebody posted it so guilt is the opposite of shame. And guilt was this thing where it's actually accepting responsibility, personal responsibility, as opposed to shame, which was this like fear of and shame of who I am and what I represent. And I see that show up in organizations in different ways. So if we're embracing shame as a result of realizing that there's these horrible things happening in the world, and we might have contributed to it unknowingly, embracing shame causes an organization to be very, very stuck. And it creates a really negative culture. Embracing responsibility, which was discussed earlier in the conversation, allows the organization to kind of be on a growth mindset pathway and learn new things, be open to new things, feel the discomfort and that results from the conversations that you have to unpack in order to repack and rebuild. And so I appreciate you bringing that discussion to the table as well. Alyssa says, shame only lives in silence. And I think that is a quote as well from Brené Brown. So when you unpack that, when you're ashamed, you keep everything private and you don't want to share and you don't want to unpack, right? And then once you get into this space where you're willing to unpack, you're willing to be very open, you can learn and live. Okay, she said, yep, it was Brené Brown. you can learn and you can have dialogues that you usually wouldn't have been able to happen. So I thank you for sharing that with us. I thank you for your knowledge and wisdom. I can't wait to hear from you again, and I hope to stay connected and in touch with you. Thank you so much for your support in this conversation. So I appreciate all of you for being in this with us. We've had some really, really great discussion. I have watched the chat and appreciate the wisdom of the entire group that's coming up and showing up within the chat. So I recommend everybody look at the chat for the ideas and discussion that's happening there. I want to, within this frame of the conversation about leading with a multicultural lens, it's interesting. So what I think is really important, and I've gleaned from a lot of the conversation that we've had, is to remember this sense of balance. So when you're leading in these organizations and you have to do this work, for each and every one of us, there's a whole lot of learning that we have to do. And it's constant. And so to be able to lead with a sense of humility allows us to continue to learn, the same as being able to lead with a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, the same as being able to lead from a sense of responsibility. It allows us to be open and unpack and have conversations. And it's equally as important to lead with a sense of confidence, because you are being intentional and reflective in your ways of engagement. And I just think that's important to remember. I think that's very much connected to the conversation that Dr. Jonathan brought up about shame being a horrible teacher. If we only lead with humility, we end up in this space where we don't know how to fix things. But when we balance humility, a sense of humility with a sense of confidence, it can be very powerful. I've seen examples of that type of leadership. I've been fortunate enough to learn from people and to see examples of that type of leadership, and it's powerful, and it creates a culture of change and a culture of transformation, because it allows other people to be vulnerable in those ways and allows other people to learn and grow and build together. I also want to share that another tidbit that I got through this conversation and through my own experiences, which is, leaders that are leading with a multicultural frame are noticing and questioning what others might not be, and they're digging deeper. We heard from Dr. Ramon about that, about not stopping at the statement that it is wrong to riot, but digging deeper to understand why that's happening. Really, why? Why are we seeing the criminalization of Black and Brown people so heavily? Why are we seeing these outcomes in health, education, and economic participation? And why are outcomes predictable by race? And let's dig deeper and let's figure out within our organizations why our outcomes are predictable by race. Why can I predict that at our organizations in the Twin Cities, some of you do, I'm not describing you specifically, but why can I predict when I'm sitting across a table with a leader the issues that their organization probably has, predictably by race? I can predict that you don't have a lot of leaders of color in your organization. I can predict that you're dealing with some outcomes that are disappointingly predictable by race. And how do we unpack that? So I think leading with a multicultural frame allows us to go deeper and unpack those things. It also allows us to reflect and affirm what communities are already grappling with, what communities and neighborhoods have been describing as issues that are unacceptable in their neighborhoods for years. It's important that we remember to do our own work. Let's not let ourselves off the hook when we say, oh, it's just wrong for them to riot, or we say, oh, we just can't find enough people of color. There's not as many qualified people of color to do this job, and so we'll go on ahead and do business as usual. When we give ourselves that permission, we let ourselves off the hook and we move into business as usual. And I think that is important to not do. So if we assume we're all equally capable, and we assume we're all equally worthy, which I believe we all assume, then we know that we all should have equal, equitable health, education, and economic participation. We know that no one group of us is more or less criminal than the other. No one group of us is more or less flawed. So then the predictability in our outcomes is absolutely unacceptable. We have similar inputs and then vastly different outcomes. So that lets us know that something in the middle is flawed, and that gives us the opportunity to take responsibility and act. It gives us power to recognize that there's something in the middle that's about how we structure our systems that we can change, we can transform, and that leads us to act and respond in ways that most might not. The answers are there, the community is there. We reach out to community when we lead with a multicultural lens. We are leaning into, what was the question? Counterintuitive solidarity was the concept that Dr. Jonathan shared with us. We are leaning into counterintuitive solidarity because we know that there's an opportunity in that conversation to learn and to bring that learning into, even if we never agree with the point that the other person is making, there is learning that we can gain from that. And that can help us build solutions with and in support of communities that we care so deeply about. So I thank you all for joining this conversation. I'm peeking over to see if there's any last thoughts from the group. The presenters have been so wise, kind, and generous, and they absolutely have. Mary says, wonderful session. Bonnie says, so many great takeaways. Thank you to SPAC, Anika, and all the presenters. At this point, I just want to let you all know that I'm extremely grateful for the conversation, and I look forward to seeing you all again at the next dialogue that we'll have together next month. I am going to turn it over to Shannon to close us out, and I will see you next month. Take care.
Thank you so much, Anika, and Dr. Jonathan, Dr. Ramon, and Elder Atum and Menkara have had to leave early, but just such a powerful reflection in so many ways, and a lot to chew on in many ways. If we ask why are we focused on culture, mindset, and worldview, we have to know ourselves. We have to see how we see ourselves and see others in order to do the work needed for change. So what is the work? You're coming to these sessions, what is the work? And Anika has said it so well. We're looking for equitable outcomes in education, economics, who owns homes, who has great careers, who has thriving business, who is able to create wealth, what about our health and well-being? And so what does it mean? It's very practical, intangible, and Dr. Jonathan was very specific about ways that we can drive change. We've looked at models for change. We've looked at constructs and how we see ourselves. What will we change? In this whole notion of anti-racism, how are we leaning in? What do we say when we're at the table? How are our actions demonstrating that we believe that lives matter, that a Black life is equal to all lives? These are tough conversations, but we're here together, going through this journey together. And the work is real, and it's very necessary. One of the beautiful things about this network is that many of the participants on the call, including our 5 presenters today, not that Anika is a presenter, but even Anika and our 4 presenters today, are great resources. They're available to help guide organizations through. We see that you are sharing information with one another and that there's resource among us. So I really encourage us to continue this journey, to move forward together, to continue to lean in, to continue to have the courage to speak up, whether it's across the fence talking to a neighbor, at the table, or on a Zoom call with your team, looking at these issues and having these very difficult conversations. so that we can actually drive change together. We welcome your feedback always. This is a journey and a process, and we are creating our content based on your feedback, so please do share. Our next session is August 19th. It will focus on the conversation, are you employee ready? And so we've kind of heard, the nuance. We're talking about much of the focus being on those asking for a seat at the table and trying to help those who are seeking a seat at the table fit in. The real work is what is happening at the table and why is it not welcoming to more people? And so the conversation on August 19th is, are you employee ready? Is your organization actually ready to accept the whole truth of those who are seeking to bring talent and capability to your organization? Is your organization ready to harness the power and possibilities of difference and creativity and innovation brought by people who see things differently? Is your organization ready to win? And so that will be our conversation on August 19th. We just thank you all for participating. I encourage you to look at the Cultural Wellness Center and the resources that they have. I encourage you to reach out, as Anika said, to Dr. Ramon and Dr. Jonathan. And I encourage you to look at Anika and the great power that she brings to these capabilities. Thank you. Happy Wednesday. It's hump day. I know for me, yesterday it seemed like it was Thursday, but today is Wednesday, and we are moving forward on another great week. So thank you all for joining, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you all.